are deaths that history tries to forget. Not because they were obscure or unremarkable, but because they were too sharp, too unsettling, like a splinter beneath the skin of civilization. Giordano Bruno's death was one of them. For centuries, it lingered not as a story, but as a silence, an uncomfortable echo in the vaulted corridors of memory. Burned alive in 1600 in the center of Rome, he left behind no saints, no shrine, no prayer, only a thought. And that thought, more than any scream, refused to die. Before he was flame, he was noise, a torrent of voice, of questions, of eyes that saw too much. Born in Nola, a village crouched under the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, Bruno arrived into a world trembling with fire, both literal and theological. His mother called him Filippo. The church called him Dominican. The world would call him heretic. But before he was any of those, he was a boy who watched the stars, not for signs of fate, but for signs of infinity. He was not supposed to be extraordinary. His family had little to offer. No noble blood, no land, no legacy. But he had something rarer. He remembered everything. Words, pages, entire books clung to his mind like ash to skin. It terrified his teachers and delighted his first confessor. He was marked early for the cloth, and by age 15, he wore the black and white habit of Saint Dominic. They called him Brother Giordano. He called himself a seeker. Inside the thick, cloistered walls of the monastery, he read, and read, and read. Aquinas, yes, but also Averroes, Lucretius, Hermes Trismegistus, the forbidden texts, the occult fragments buried in margins. While the other friars memorized catechisms, Bruno memorized cosmos. While they debated angels dancing on pins, he imagined worlds dancing in the dark. He began to say strange things at supper. That Christ may have spoken in metaphor, that the earth was not the center, that perhaps sin was a misunderstanding of motion. They warned him gently at first, then with silence, then with summons. He was 28 when the Dominican order opened its file on him. Not long after, he ran. He did not walk quietly from the gates of Naples. He fled like a man pursued by shadows, his cowl discarded, his books hidden, his name dropped. He moved through the streets of Italy under aliases and hunger. In Venice, he lectured under the name Nolano. In Geneva, he debated Calvinists until they too threatened to turn him over. In France, he taught logic, but taught it too well, and drew the envy of scholars. In England, he made enemies of both Catholics and Protestants alike. He moved not like a man with a mission, but like a storm of thought, uncontainable, unwelcome. Everywhere he went, he sowed discomfort. Everywhere he left echoes. He was not warm, he was not kind. He did not win friends or convert followers. He did not weep for the poor or tend to the sick. He wrote like a man on fire. He spoke like a blade. His ideas were not gentle awakenings, they were detonations. The universe, he claimed, was infinite. The stars were suns. The earth moved. The soul was immortal, but not unique to man. The divine was immanent, not trapped in churches or rituals, but present in all things. He did not argue. He pronounced, with wit, with scorn, with joy. He laughed at Aristotle. He mocked theologians. He dismantled hierarchies with a single breath. He claimed the devil did not tempt men, ignorance did. He claimed the church had mistaken metaphor for law. He claimed the Bible was a human text, written in divine longing but not divine certainty. He claimed that every man had the right to think freely. And most dangerous of all, he believed it. In Oxford, he offended professors with his Italian accent and his defiance. he said they were parrots reciting dead men's bones. In Paris, he told students to unlearn what they had learned. In Germany, he said Luther had broken the lock, but not opened the door.
No place could hold him. No institution could contain him. And yet, he was drawn to Rome, as if moth to the very fire that would kill him. He returned in 1591 under invitation. A nobleman named Mocenigo promised patronage in Venice. Bruno believed, perhaps naively, that Italy had changed, that the age of fire was fading, that the Inquisition had turned inward toward witches and sodomites and less dangerous prey. He underestimated how many files had followed him. Mocenigo, frustrated with Bruno's reluctance to teach forbidden arts, betrayed him. In May 1592, he was arrested, and the silence began. 7 years. 7 years of interrogation, isolation, theological dissection. He was questioned by cardinals, examined by scholars, visited by Jesuits. They read to him his own words. They demanded he explain metaphors. They ordered him to repent. He refused. Again and again. Not loudly, not with flames of rhetoric, but with a simple, horrifying calm. He corrected their Latin. He clarified his meanings. He admitted what he had said. And when asked to recant, he replied, "I neither ought nor want to recant." He would not be broken. Not by iron, not by solitude, not by the Holy Office. He said, "I do not fear being burned." He said, "Truth does not change because it is or is not believed by a majority." They tried everything. Isolation, starvation, again and again. Not loudly, not with flames of rhetoric, but with a simple, horrifying calm. He corrected their Latin. He clarified his meanings. He admitted what he had said. And when asked to recant, he replied, "I neither ought nor want to recant." He would not be broken. Not by iron, not by solitude, not by the Holy Office. He said, "I do not fear being burned." He said, "Truth does not change because it is or is not believed by a majority." They tried everything. Isolation, starvation. They say the fire at Campo de Fiori on February 17, 1600, was ordinary. The kind of execution Rome had grown used to, structured, timely, with no room for disruption. A man tied to a stake, a wooden platform stacked with dry bundles, a black-robed priest reading a verdict no one would hear clearly, and smoke. Smoke rising like a failed prayer into a sky that remained pitilessly blue. But what happened that morning was anything but ordinary. Giordano Bruno was led through the streets gagged. They say it was to prevent blasphemy, but it was not blasphemy they feared. It was clarity. He had spoken too clearly for too long. His words had already carved cracks into the marble logic of theology. He had called the stars other suns, the universe infinite, the soul unbound. And so they silenced him, not because he lied, but because he might still tell the truth on the way to death. He was stripped naked before the stake, not just to humiliate him, but unmake him. Remove the philosopher's robes, the writer's body, the intellect's dignity. What remained was a man of bone and fire, but they were mistaken if they thought fire would be enough. Bruno did not marnst Babby to thrash. He did not thrash. He did not beg. Witnesses wrote that he stared straight ahead, his eyes burning long before the flames touched him. They burned with everything he refused to recant, with stars he would never name, with galaxies that had no edges, with souls that refused to kneel. They burned with silence more damning than any curse. As the flames rose and wrapped around him, the crowd watched. A crowd trained to look, to judge, to nod when the Inquisition acted. But some of them, maybe only a few, watched differently that day. Maybe they felt it, even if they didn't understand the wrongness of it, the desperation behind the ritual, that this was not a punishment, it was a confession. The church had built the fire not to kill a man, but to erase a mirror that had reflected something unbearable, that God might be bigger than any temple could hold. Afterward, they gathered the ashes, scattered them into the Tiber, the same river that had swallowed other voices. But ashes are not silence. Ashes move. They stick to skin, fall on lips, get carried in the folds of cloaks and pages. The Tiber carried him into the veins of the city, into its libraries, its lecture halls, its alleys and taverns and cloisters. He did not vanish. He diffused. The church returned to routine. The congregation of the Index reviewed books. The Holy Office resumed trials. Another heretic, another year, another flame. But Bruno remained. Not in the records, they tried to keep those minimal. Not in sermons, they dared not name him. He remained in the pause, the breath that lingered before a student asked too much. He remained in the eyes of a philosopher who looked at the stars and refused to believe in walls. His books, once burned, reappeared, not immediately but slowly, illegally, secretly, copied in fragments, hidden in Latin glossaries, rediscovered in strange places, Antwerp, Basel, London. His cosmology, too radical in life, began to make sense when telescopes found Jupiter's moons, when Kepler's orbits defied circles, when Newton hinted at motion without angels pushing spheres, and Bruno, once the fool of Europe, became its ghost. He was never canonized by science. He wasn't careful enough. His mind had been too strange, too reckless, mixing magic with mathematics, poetry with physics, riddles with reason. He spoke of divine fire animating nature. He praised ancient Egyptian wisdom. He used the stars like metaphors and formulas like incantations. Scientists preferred Galileo. Galileo obeyed, at least for a while. But still, Bruno remained. Not in the equations, in the edges, the questions that dared to go too far, the minds that would not be told to stop. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The Vatican issued statements, condemned new thinkers, blessed new saints. But Bruno kept returning, not as a doctrine, but as a warning of what happens when an institution is faced with something it cannot absorb, of what it does to the ungovernable soul. In 1889, nearly 300 years after his execution, a statue was erected in the very place where he had burned. Not a saint's statue, not a martyr's, a dark figure, hooded, cloaked, unsmiling, eyes cast downward, not in shame but in shadow. He holds a book, all the Bible, but his own words. He looks not at the church, but beyond it. The monument bears no cross, only a sentence, to Giordano Bruno from the century he foresaw. And still, the Vatican protested. Still, it trembled. Because Giordano Bruno did not die for rejecting one dogma. He died for rejecting the idea that dogma should rule thought. He died because he imagined a cosmos in which the divine was not at the center, but everywhere. He died because he refused to let the Inquisition name the borders of his soul. And when they burned him, they thought they had destroyed the man, but they had only made room for the idea. And that idea, terrifying, luminous, infinite, survived the fire. There is a silence that comes after fire, a silence more eloquent than screams. After the execution of Giordano Bruno, that silence settled thickly over Rome. The Holy Office did not celebrate, no bells rang, no masses were offered. It was a death too clean to boast about, too deliberate to forget. And yet, they tried. For a time, the Church succeeded in making him disappear. Not with censorship, but with neglect. No encyclical denounced him. No theological response was written. He became a ghost of omission, unspoken but present. But ghosts have a tendency to gather weight. Over the decades, the Enlightenment came like a second fire. This time, not of punishment, but of illumination, of light aimed at the same shadows Bruno had lived among. Philosophers and scientists began to look at him not as a heretic, but as a prophet without a church. Spinoza, Voltaire, Goethe, all invoked him not as a martyr to science, but as a man who had understood something too early and paid the price. Still, he was not easy to claim. His works were too arcane, his style too strange. He wrote in dialogues that shifted shape mid-sentence. He blended cosmology with Neoplatonism, physics with Hermetic dreams. He was not Galileo, whose defiance was clean, brief, and reluctantly recanted. Bruno was wild. He had no school, no followers, no tidy conclusion. And yet he mattered, precisely because of that. Because he stood for the unorganized voice, the individual mind against the mechanism, the spark that does not ask permission to ignite. In the 19th century, when Europe began to remember its burned thinkers and buried questions, Bruno rose again, not through theology, but through memory. He became a figure in poems, in statues, in whispered admiration among those who felt choked by institutions that still clung to old chains. Italian revolutionaries raised his image as a symbol of the free intellect. Romantics admired his suffering. Rationalists admired his nerve. And humanists, above all, saw in him something few others ever represented so clearly: the willingness to think all the way through, even to the fire. That is what Bruno offered, not a system, but a mirror. He was not right about everything. He was not always coherent, but he was consistent in one thing. He did not retreat, not from doubt, not from vision, not from contradiction. When the fire came, he walked toward it. In 1600, there were no microphones in the square. No one recorded his final breath. But two words linger, supposedly spoken before they gagged him. Perhaps you fear more in passing sentence on me than I do in receiving. No proof, no record. Just a phrase carried like a rumor across centuries. And yet, it fits. Not because it sounds heroic, but because it rings true, like the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything still burning behind his eyes. Today, his name appears in textbooks, in university halls, in bronze. But the real monument is more elusive. It's in the act of thought itself, unguarded, unafraid. In the moment someone asks a question and does not flinch from the answer. In the refusal to be comforted by walls dressed as heavens. In the realization that infinity is not a threat to the divine, but a testament to it. Bruno did not die to be remembered. He died because he would not lie. And in that refusal, he offered the world not a theory, but a shape, not a theology, not even a philosophy, a silhouette, of the kind of person institutions are built to break, and sometimes fail. He left no relics, no bones, no grave, only thought. And thought, once touched by flame, becomes a kind of light, not warm, not gentle, but impossible to extinguish. What remains of a man who left behind no grave, no followers, no absolution? For Giordano Bruno, what remained was not memory, but warning, a low flame in the corner of history, flickering whenever silence grows too heavy and conformity too dense. He does not rise like a saint, but lingers like a presence impossible to pray to, impossible to dismiss. Modernity tried to claim him. Scientists labeled him a forerunner of astronomy, a martyr for Copernican thought. But that was never quite right. Bruno's cosmos was not one of orbits and equations. It was a breathing thing, alive with spirit and motion, sacred and terrible in its scope. He did not peer through telescopes. He closed his eyes and imagined a universe with no edge, no center, no hierarchy, where man was not chosen but participating, where God was not enthroned but immanent in every atom. His vision was not of order, but of terrifying freedom. He was, in the truest sense, unmanageable. And that, even now, is what gives him power. Because we still live in worlds shaped by systems that tell us what to think, what to fear, what to say. And every once in a while, someone wanders past the boundaries, not with a sword, not with a manifesto, but with a single defiant sentence. What if this is not all? That's when Bruno returns, not in sermons, not in history books, but in that invisible shiver along the spine that says, "You are not meant to be safe. You are meant to be awake." In Rome today, tourists walk through Campo de Fiori without knowing what once stood there in smoke. Flower vendors laugh, cafes buzz, life hums with the indifference of cities built atop their own sins. But in the middle of the square, Bruno stands. The hooded statue still looms, darker than the stone around it, casting no smile, offering no comfort. His face is severe, the face of a man who said no so completely that even time could not soften it. People walk past, take photos, read plaques, most keep walking, but some stop. Not because they believe what he believed, but because something in them recognizes the weight of his silence. He does not speak, but he watches, and that is enough. Giordano Bruno is not easy to love. He was arrogant, abrasive, impatient. He believed too much, too quickly, and spoke with the fury of a man who had seen something vast and unbearable. But he did one thing few ever do. He followed the truth wherever it led, even when it led to fire, and because of that, he became something no institution can tolerate: a free mind. Not free in the shallow sense of rebellion or novelty. Free in the sacred sense. Free as in ungoverned, free as in vast, free as in unafraid to burn. Perhaps that's why he matters more now than ever. In a world where truth is bought, voices are filtered, and certainty is weaponized, Bruno offers no answers, only a challenge. Dare to think, dare to imagine, dare to be destroyed for it. His fire is not gone, it is waiting. In every question no one dares ask, in every answer no one wants to hear, in every silence that burns hotter than speech. Because Giordano Bruno did not die in Rome, he only changed form, and now he lives wherever thought refuses to kneel.